Okay, so let's start this workshop that accidentally turned into a whole audio course in the process of its creation with a bit of a reflection. Because before we start looking forwards to things and into the future, it's a wise idea to look back on the lessons we've learned and the wisdom that we've collected, because that gives us the information about the trajectory on which our path is evolving. And it also gives us hints about our direction, the direction that we're going in. Although I will say that if there ever was or ever will be a year where you would do well to expect the unexpected and accept that you are just going to have to roll with a bunch of sudden, unexpected pivots, then that's 2026. So, yes, we're looking at the trajectory, we're looking at the path ahead, knowing that it all might change very rapidly and also trusting that it's for the best. Okay, so what we are going to look back on is 2025 as a whole, as a year that we just left behind, which numerologically was a 9 year, and in Chinese astrology, so energetically, was a year of the wood snake. I'll get into that in a moment. We will also look back into the last 9 year numerologically, which was 2016. And I think some of you may have done it because apparently it's a whole trend on Instagram right now. And we're going to look into the last snake year, which was 2013. So I'm going to give you a few prompts for you to get into the energy, but the idea of this whole part is for you to do this reflection for yourself so that you see what comes up, so that you see what was happening in 2013, in 2016, how that relates to whatever was happening in 2025 for you personally. And then for some collective historic context, we're also going to take a peek into what was going on in the 1960s, particularly around 65 and 66, because in a lot of ways, it seems to be relevant for like this moment in time that we're living in right now. Okay, so starting with 2025, which, as I said, was numerologically a 9 year, energetically, or in Chinese astrology, it was the year of the wood snake. And when I was preparing this workshop or a variation of it last year for 2025, the main three themes I associated the year with were endings, a quickening, and renewal. So I just want to take you through these three to help you feel into the energy of this year that is behind us now, and you will see whatever resonates with you. So, in terms of endings, like I said, it was a 9 year. So, that's the number that you get when you sum up all of the digits of a year. And 9 is a number that closes a cycle, specifically the cycle of the last 9 years of your life. So it's an end of an era, a conclusion to a chapter, and also a big purging and a release of some sorts. So 9 marks the year when the old falls apart to make space for the new. And a lot of us experienced that in 2025 in some way, shape, or form. Now, whenever we have things ending, we inevitably have things beginning at the same time. That's just how natural cycles work. So, for example, the last day of your menstrual cycle is actually the first day of your period. The last day of winter is also the first day of spring. And that's just how it works. So when we have a lot of things ending, we inevitably have a lot of things beginning. And we had new beginnings in 2025. It's just that they weren't permanent beginnings. A lot of them just felt like a rehearsal or a temporary, brief insight into what is actually possible for us in the future. Now, astrologically speaking, that meant that in 2025, all of the outer planets, and when I say outer planets, those are the slow moving planets that are far away from the Earth and that affect the collective as a whole, as opposed to the personal planets, which are closer to the sun, so Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which reflect more of what is going on in your inner world. So all of those outer planets that affect the collective and big global change in 2025 had a brief stint, if you will, in their new signs. So all of them moved from where they have been, and some of them have been there for almost 30 years, into entirely new territory, and not just any territory, but two of those. So Saturn and Neptune moved into Aries, which is the very beginning of the zodiac, the very beginning of the astrological cycle. And in the context of outer planet, actually a beginning of a whole new era. So that happened for all of them except for Pluto. That's been in its new sign since the end of 2024, but that's still relatively new since Pluto has the longest orbit in our solar system and will stay in the sign of Aquarius until 2043. So it's really just getting started there too. But when it comes to the rest of them, and I said that they had a brief stint in their new signs, that's because then they all stationed retrograde and they moved backwards back into their old signs, which also means that in 2025, they spent a lot of time traveling over this, what is called critical degrees in astrology. So particularly the 29th degree of Pisces, which is the very last degree of the zodiac. So it's where everything ends and completes. And then the 0 degrees of Aries, which is the creation point where it all begins again. So we had an interesting and really intense mixture of endings and beginnings in 2025. Another theme that I spoke about last year in terms of 2025 was quickening. And that, on one hand, has to do with what we just talked about and all these planets moving from slow moving signs. That's something that I haven't mentioned, the elemental aspect of it. So, in the old, we had most of these big collective planets in slow signs that are ruled by the elements of either water or earth. And with these two elements, things move slowly. But now all of these signs are tapping into the elements of fire and air. And that's a very quick energy. So that's what we have experienced in 2025. But also, we have been experiencing time accelerating here on Earth for quite some time. And that became more evident last year. And that's a part of this transition that we are in as we are moving into a new era. I like to call it a new paradigm. Some call it 5D as opposed to the 3D reality that we have been living in up until now. And that's about to get really, really evident in 2026. So we will come back to that soon. Now, for the third theme of 2025, we had renewal, which mostly had to do with the fact that it was the year of the wood snake. Now, the way it works in Chinese astrology is every year gets an animal, and then each of these animals gets an element, and there are 5 elements in the Chinese astrology. One of them is wood. So we had the wood snake as a symbol of intuition and wisdom and mystery and transformation. What was really telling about this energy of the snake is that she sheds the old skin to welcome in the new. And she does that in an effortless sort of way, very elegantly, she just slides right out of her old skin and she's already new. 2025 wasn't necessarily as elegant. Perhaps, hopefully, for some of you, it was. And then wood. Wood represents growth and creativity and flexibility, but also stability. So, in a lot of ways, 2025, although it might have been a challenging year, was an opportunity for change and a rebirth and expansion and renewal. It's just that, change and rebirth aren't always necessarily an easy experience. So that is really going to be determined by your personal context. And that's actually what we are talking about next, as I'll invite you to think back on your last 9 year and on your last snake year. So as I said, 2016 and 2013. Now I realize that takes some time and dedication on your end. It's not something that we just pull out of thin air, usually, unless you already did the Instagram trend, then that might be easier for you right now. But the reason I am suggesting this, it's that it's something I always do too, and it gives me a lot of perspective. And I did it this year as well. And what I came to realize is that 2013, so the last snake year, was beautiful in a lot of ways. I was temporarily living in a small town close to Malaga in the south of Spain, which ended in a road trip back home that has given me so much, but also it was deeply challenging on a lot of levels. It was when my then partner started struggling with severe depression and anxiety that he refused to get treated, and just sort of put all of that responsibility onto me. We fought a lot. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any sex. And the only way to escape from really the terrifying nature of that situation, now that I think back on it, was to just watch a ton of Netflix. Really, I numbed myself down completely by just watching a ton of Netflix. And then we had this, what would have been a beautiful road trip, but not with someone who's suffering from depression and anxiety. Plus, we had this incident in France where my windshield wipers stopped working and we almost died on the highway because it suddenly, like really all of a sudden, like a cloud snapped. I've never seen anything like that. Started pouring when we were on the highway and there was nothing I could do. And it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. And then I came back home to find my beloved grandfather in a state where he was just skin and bones in a diaper and couldn't remember who he was, let alone remember me. But nobody told me that because my family is always trying to protect me from something, and he died 2 months later. So that was 2013. Then in 2016, I was still in that same relationship, which by that point has been dead for the past 3 years. Already, we were living in a different city in Spain. I was working at a job I hated. I was constantly stressed out of my mind. There was no point or meaning to it all, so I was still trying to escape the reality of it with a lot of Netflix. On the other hand, his depression and anxiety got better, so seemingly there was more going on in our life. There were more moments that stayed in my memory. And what is really interesting is that year also, we went on a road trip through France because I had to do that for work, and he came with me, and our tire blew up on the highway on our rental car. So we almost died again. And I don't really know why I'm sharing all this with you right now. But when you go back in time like that, you do find certain themes that repeat themselves in the years that are in some way energetically connected. Like, I mean, I only almost died in France twice in my life, and it was both times during this year that is in some way connected to 2025. Now, what is interesting also is that at the very beginning of 2025, we were actually driving through France with my family, with my new partner, with our girls, ending our 3-month van life adventure through Spain and Portugal. And this time, it was beautiful driving through France. So that's like sort of a 9-year snake loop that closed in 2025. And I just think it's kind of cool. That's why I'm sharing it, and to like give you a bit of an encouragement to actually do this reflection for yourself, because you might find some fascinating things too. Now, before you go do that, and I'm actually going to give you some questions that are going to help you do that, and it's all in your playbook too, I just wanted to offer or bring up that actually, okay, we just looked at the last snake year, but the last wood snake was 60 years ago. So same animal with the same element only repeats every 60 years. So that was in 1965. And there were actually a lot of parallels that we can draw between 1965 and 2025. And I'm just saying this because a lot of us don't have that direct experience. We weren't here yet, at least, not in this lifetime, not in this body, but there was like this big collective awakening going on or beginning to happen back then. People were actively protesting against what wasn't right or fair. And what stands out particularly here is war. Back then, things were escalating in Vietnam in 2025. It was Gaza, and this sense of collective helplessness as we just watch in horror what is going on. Like, what's happening to innocent people and innocent children, and nobody seems to do anything about it. But as this horror like silently simmers, I have a feeling it's also turning into a sense of power within us, the collective power that we hold when we come together. And I think that's going to be big in 2026. So we are coming back to that. There were, voting issues. Immigration was big back then, and it's big now because it's redefining countries' policies, national identities. And then there is technology that is redefining our reality today, but that in a way was sparked back right around 1965 with the beginning of what they called exponential computing. But really, it just means that things really started blowing up back then. And now we're sort of living in the consequences of that. So that's another interesting aspect to hold in mind. However, it's time for us to make this personal right now. And I'm just going to offer a few reflective questions for you as you look back before we move forward. And as I said, this is all in your playbook as well. So you can print that out and just do it there. So, what were your main lessons of 2025? What ended, and what did that ending make space for? What began during the spring and summer months of 2025 that was an indication or an insight of what is possible for you in the future? And how did you feel during those months? So let's say April to August, more or less. What was happening in your life in 2016, which was the last 9 years, in terms of endings and conclusions? And how does that relate to 2025? And also, what was happening in your life in 2013, which was the last snake year, when it comes to shedding and deep transformation, but also in terms of the wisdom you've gained? So I will leave you with these questions for now, and I will talk to you in the next part where we are looking forward to a lot of things, actually. I'll talk to you there.